Good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of Sports Philanthropy Network live here at Radio in Los Angeles, California. Join us, Dr. Michael Gervais, expert in high performance psychology, industry visionary, has a joint venture with the Sox and Coach Pete Carroll. Dr. Gervais has worked across 3 Summer Olympics in Tokyo, Rio, and London, 2 Winter Olympics, served as the Olympic high performance psychologist for USA Beach Volleyball, USA Women's Indoor Volleyball, and most recently USA Surfing in Tokyo. Working with the best, including gold medalist Carissa Moore, John Florence, and gold medalist April Ross. Welcome, Doctor. Thanks for joining us.
It's great to be here with you.
We're excited to have you with us today. I know you've done a lot of work with these high performance athletes, and I think one of the things that's always really interesting to us is looking at how athletes get to that upper level, right? The difference between them physically is not necessarily as great as some of the challenges and the distinctions mentally. And so how do you prepare and train these athletes to be successful?
As humans, there's only 3 things that we can train. We can train our craft, we can train our body, and we can train our mind. And the best in the world are reminding us and showing us the way that training your mind is one of the core foundations to becoming your very best. And so the science of the psychology of excellence is not that complicated. It's a set of practices that you engage in on a regular basis to condition and train your mind to be more present, more connected to this moment more often. And so we can train to be confident. We can train to be calm. We can train our minds to see excellence as opposed to see all the things that are wrong. And so there's a whole suite of best practices that we employ with some of the best in the world.
Dr. Gervais, I love that. I have to ask you, working with 2 Super Bowls,
You look at the
players who outperform everybody else. I got to ask you, what is the psychology behind those players who outperform everybody else?
Well, the essence is that they are working on a regular basis to be their very best. And so they're probably not interested solely on just being better than others. They're more interested in being their very best. And so that's what happens on Monday, on review day. It's what happens on Wednesday on practice and Thursday. And so there's a best practice of becoming one's very best. And so that is based on the small little micro choices that we make. Do I choose this thought or that thought? Do I choose this action or that action? Do I choose this food or that food? And then when you stack those up over time, before you know it, you're really fit physically, mentally. You've got a sound body of work underneath your belt. And so that's what it looks like. It's the small micro choices of excellence.
When you talk about those micro choices, it makes a lot of sense, just conceptually in terms of how that works. The question that I think is really interesting for people is, how do you actually do that training? Because you can talk about those choices, but when it gets into the heat of competition, when you get NFL players that are lining up and somebody's getting ready to hit them, they've got to be able to make those decisions and micro choices in milliseconds.
Okay, so you're right. That's why we do training. We call it front loading. So you front load your physical training, you front load your technical and strategy. You also front load your mental training. So how do you do that? Right? Is you want to be able to respond eloquently to the fast-paced, high-demand environment. So we don't want to be sorting out in those moments. Am I confident? What are my thoughts? I want to do that well in advance. And so one of the easy practices to think about is the practice of developing great self-talk. So we always have conversations with ourselves throughout the day, and those are either facilitating us to be present and to feel great about our future, or they're getting in the way. They're constricting us. And so it's a simple practice of writing down, what does it sound like when I'm at my best? Writing those statements down. And then for each statement that you write down, like what are you saying to yourself when you're at your best? Have a dash that goes to that and say, what gives me the right to speak that way to myself? So what in my history allows me to back it up? And so if you do that work ahead of time, you don't have to try to sort out as soon as the lights come on and there's 70,000 people like, am I okay? You know how to speak to yourself, and you know that you've earned the right to speak to yourself that way. So it's a very simple little practice, and it pays dividends.
So I love that, Dr. Gervais. It actually leads right into my next question.
For a lot of
these guys, the biggest game of their life, the biggest event
next to
their
their marriage,
marriage,
the
the
birth
birth of their children, whatever that they're ever going to experience. There's a lot of noise, and then that social media contributes to it, the pressure. What is the best approach for an athlete to use? Block out the noise, the Super Bowl week heading into the game. How do they just focus on what they need to do?
It's a great question, because that's exactly what they're wrestling with right now. If they didn't make a decision early on in the preseason, if they did not make this decision about either this game is the biggest game of their life or it's just another game. So that's a fundamental decision that they need to make. And if you make that decision with great clarity, and then you're committed to living that way, then it unfolds as something you're prepared for. But what happens for athletes is they don't fundamentally make decisions. The coaches aren't driving that conversation early on. They say to themselves, like, okay, it's just another game. It's just another game. It's just another game. But really, they've got another mind, which is like, it's the biggest game. I hope I'm okay. I'm going to be okay. Like, it's going to work out. Like, I've got work. So it's like a tug of war or a wrestle that happens inside themselves. That's a bit of a disaster. That's an untrained approach to being prepared to live in the present moment. And so what's the quick answer? Learn how you speak about yourself, about your future. And I like to nudge people towards, hold on, either you can do it either way. There's not a right or wrong way to do this, but I like to nudge people towards this idea that this is just another game. The conditions of the field are always a bit different, but the length is always the same. The yard markers are the same. The weight of the ball is the same. The rules are the same. It's something that I've done for a long time. So I'm going to prepare to my best abilities to be able to meet this game that I love. And the only difference is that other people are watching. And I'll be damned if I'm going to be different just because other people are watching.
And I think that's an important point, because you talk about training like it's just another game, but we all know it isn't just another game. It is the Super Bowl, right? And it has added pressure. And so one of the things that's interesting in a lot of the physical training, right, teams will really customize and taper that as they get closer to the game so that the players are not physically worn down. You look at a week like this, a Super Bowl week with all of the activities and everything going on, how can the players mentally prepare for that week? And then what amount of time do you have them dedicate on a daily basis or a weekly basis to these mental exercises preparing for the games?
First part of that question is that I believe that the only moment that matters is the one we're in. And so this is the moment. And if I'm not able to meet this moment with my most authentic, best self, I'm not prepared to meet another moment when there's 70,000 screaming fans. So I practice being in this moment as often as I possibly can. My mind is not bulletproof, like I'm distracted just like everyone else, but this is a practice that matters to me. So I don't believe that Super Bowl game is a defining game. I don't believe that it's a big game. It's awesome. If you live your life in alignment with this moment matters. You bring a zest and a fire and a compassion and an authenticity in all of your relationships. The relationships with yourself, the relationships with your teammates, the relationship with your future. There's a fire in the belly when you live that way. So how do you prepare? You practice this moment and this moment again to be fully engaged at your very best. That's the essence of it.
Yeah, and that makes so much sense to me, because if you're doing that same thing over and over and over, build the good habits. We're blessed. Sports Philanthropy Network, we work with the nonprofits, the athletes who have dedicated more than being average. They're the best. They're giving back to their communities. They have charities, they have foundations. So that just makes me think, have you ever worked with an athlete who was really ready and prepared for the Super Bowl?
Oh yeah. So I was fortunate enough to work with the Seahawks when we went to 2 Super Bowls. One was exactly how we had hoped. And the second one was we had a little bit of a surprise. We lost in the last kind of moments there. And so, yeah, the world of psychology it's invisible, but it's not that complicated. If you have confidence, by building confidence based on the way you speak to yourself, you'll be confident later. And if you breathe in ways to relax yourself, you'll be able to manage your emotions. But we practice those well in advance. And I'll leave us with a quick story. I'm going to go from Super Bowl to an Olympic Games. And on the Finding Mastery podcast, which is the podcast where we sit down with the extraordinaries, Marshawn Lynch being one of them. But I want to talk about one of the greatest swimmers of all time. You know exactly who I'm talking about, Michael Phelps. So we had his coach on, and we talked about how he readies himself for the Olympics. And he says, let me tell you a story. Michael Phelps did so much imagery using his imagination to see the future that he even imagined how would he respond if his goggles filled up with water. Sure enough, in one of the games, that happens to athletes. And sure enough, at the games, it happened. And he was so prepared for it that it didn't even faze him. He ended up just barely out-touching, winning the historic, gold medal that he's known for. And so using our mind to prepare ourselves is always within our control. Yet, we have a choice. We can choose to be distracted by the noise around us, or we can choose to use our mind to live well in the present moment.
We talk about it often. You look at the amount of physical training that athletes and teams put in, right? From a very young age, athletes going through physical strength, conditioning, running, everything else like that. And how do, the amount of time dedicated to the mental side of the sport is just a small fraction of the physical side, and yet probably would be one of the largest distinguishing characteristics. When the Seahawks approached you about getting involved, tell us a little bit about how that started, and why do you think they chose you as opposed to many of the others that are out there?
So I was fortunate enough to be with the Seattle Seahawks for 9 seasons. I was not with them this past season. And when we first met, Coach Carroll and we were introduced by a mutual friend, and we had similar passions, similar interests. And those passions were about helping people become their very best from the inside out, about generatively giving to folks that didn't have access to some of these best practices. And so it was on those two first principles that I said, wow, he's really switched on about building a culture of excellence, building people from the inside out and supporting them and challenging them to be great. And so why me? I think it was built on a relationship. And then from that relationship, we're able to build a business together. It was awesome and incredible. And we're now taking those best practices from sport and helping CEOs and directors and organizations help their employees to use their minds to be their very best.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us today. My name is Kayla Brad. I'm here with Roy Kessel for Sports Philanthropy Network here on Radio Row, gearing up for the Super Bowl in LA. Roy, do me a favor and take us out.
Thanks, Kayla. Dr. Michael, we appreciate you joining us today. Great to learn more about it. I think the mental side of sports and that training is crucial and undervalued by most organizations. Congratulations on the work that you've done and your accomplishments, and we appreciate you taking time to share that with us today. To our audience, our viewers and listeners, thank you for joining the Sports Philanthropy Network live from Radio Row at Super Bowl 56 in Los Angeles. With Caleb Bradham and myself, this is Sports Philanthropy Network signing off. Please remember, to live generously.